I've got some like that, but I didn't have them out. So
So Jen, George's point, I talked to an adult all day, and it's just like.
This sounds bad.
let's see.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed hour of 6:30 and time for our work session, a budget work session. I'd like to turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate you all taking the time, a few more minutes, just to go over the last details of the budget. We feel like we've got a pretty sound budget, but your input has been really helpful. And we have just a few outstanding issues, some questions that you brought up or points that you want to have a clarity on at our last meeting. So I will let the Finance Director, Jen, go over those issues with you. I will say, though, that we are watching revenues still, and we'll have a third quarter report for you very soon. And revenues still are very positive. And Councilmember Siegler, you pointed out maybe we're a little too conservative, and we intend it to be a conservative. And frankly, several months ago, when we put the budget together, I thought that was a stance to take. And as I look at the economic conditions today, I'm even more convinced that being a little conservative isn't a bad idea. I'd rather come to you at this time next year and say, oh, there's a big surprise and we've got 6 figures of extra revenue that we just didn't anticipate, rather than come to you and say, we need to cut the budget by $500,000 somehow because the revenues weren't what we anticipated they would be. So it's, it's one of those situations. Again, I don't think we can lose. If we have more money this time next year than we thought we we put it in the fund balance and we're good to go. Or we come back and there are things that we'd like to fund and add to the budget, and we'll have that opportunity. But being conservative will hopefully avoid any negative surprises 8 or 12 months from now. So with that, I will ask Jen to go ahead and go over some of the details we have, and all of your questions are always welcome.
Hi, good evening.
Go ahead and pull that closer to you. And I'll remind everyone that the microphones are much more effective when they're closer to your mouth so that folks can hear, and helps with the recording. Right, Janie? Thank you.
So I passed out a few pieces of paper at each of your seats, and I have them in order to review, if that works. First, I wanted to talk about the reassessment. I worked with the Commissioner of the Revenue, Karen Roundy. She was able to get the numbers in. And if you look at the first sheet there, you'll see that the FY23 assessed value is 677 million. If we kept our current tax rate of $1.06 per $100 of value, that would be a tax levy of $7.1 million. And as we've discussed in the past, under the Virginia Code, when it's a reassessment year, we're only allowed to have an increase of 1%. So backing into the numbers, it looks like the appropriate tax rate would be actually 92 cents per $100. And this number, though, is still larger than what we had originally projected in the budget for revenues in FY23. So, well, any questions on this so far?
Just to affirm, the maximum that council could consider would be a 92-cent tax.
That's correct.
Could consider less, but not more.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
At some time, you could also increase the tax rate, but at this point in time, you can't take that extra revenue. You can increase the rate to beyond the above the equalized rate, but you cannot just take the extra revenue that comes through the reassessment, other than a 1% increase in revenues.
And so at the last meeting, the mayor had asked and council agreed that I include in the budget a $10,000 in the city manager's budget line for your discretion. And so I added that along with the associated fringe benefits, FICA taxes and whatnot. And that was $10,316. So because the revenue projections based on the reassessment are higher than what we initially budgeted, we're still able to have a balanced budget with that additional expense added. And so that can be seen in the replacement pages here, fund summaries on top. And since we've last looked at the budget together, the only changes have been to the city manager's line and then the real property revenues. Okay, and the next paperclip section is the updated general fund CIP. And the only changes that I've made in here since we last got together are I added in the VDOT projects. We learned recently of, was it 2 new ones? We didn't know they were going to help us fund. But then also the city manager and I had discussed whether or not it was appropriate to list those VDOT projects in the CIP. And we'd gone back and forth, and I think at different times over the years, other finance directors have gone back and forth. And we decided to keep them in and just show VDOT giving us the funding so that we could keep track of what's going on and have an easy way to remember. Lastly, I did highlight those VDOT projects in the light blue color, just so that you could easily identify them. Any questions?
I have
Please.
I was
Pull a
looking,
little bit closer to you there. It'll move. There you go.
how's it? This, I can hear myself
There you go.
in there. This is good. I was looking at the budget, obviously, it wasn't, and it just so happens that I had a conversation yesterday at our MSA meeting with Stephanie, lady at Public Works and whatnot. And this is added on to the piece of paper that we got at our last city council meeting about the replacement costs for those water meters that roughly are about $1,000 is $867 for the residential ones in there. And I learned that the water meters have somewhere around a 10-year life that's projected for those things. And I asked her how many water meters there are in the city. And the answer is 2,700. And so if you have a 10-year life and $1,000 water meter, then we're going to set aside money for replacement for those things at one point. So that's $100 per year per meter. Is not in the budget. And there's a place in the budget, there's a line for water meters, but the amount of money is going to be based on the estimates that I just stated there, $270,000 annually. And then, assuming that the water meter cost stays the same in there to do that. So, and we're already looking at, I think the word was 116 meters that are on the table for short-term replacement as well and whatnot. And I asked her, I said, what fails on these things? What's going on? What fails? And she said, it's the electronics. And these are meters that have no moving parts. And there's electronics that fail. And further, so I said, well, what are the alternatives for taking care of the water meters? We have options. And she suggested that there aren't many options for do that. One of the complications is the radio frequency and the power not to interfere with the Green Bank quiet zone, radio quiet zone. That apparently that's a problem with our meters, which is one of the reasons we selected the meters that we did select to get that approval. But anyway, I wanted to bring it to the attention that $270,000 ish type money needs a line in our budget. And then what would that do? Does that still make it balanced? Sorry to be the bearer of good news.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
One thing to keep in mind is it is a utility, is an enterprise fund, if I'm not mistaken. So that will be absorbed of sorts or budgeted for in water bills, which are already on the rise from MSAs increases, salary increases, operational increases, and what have you. So, but as an enterprise fund, perhaps it makes it the decision to have an apartment building with one water meter on Spotswood beneficial for the city and for all the residents,
Right. Right.
as we have the usage penalty from that standpoint.
Right. And I was looking at the utility fund, and that's where I saw the line for the water meter in there with nothing on it
I believe we budgeted 100,000.
at the end, but not short term. Right.
No, 100,000 per year for the next 5 years. It's in the utility fund CIP.
All right. So then I'm talking 270.
Right.
Jen, I just want to make sure I'm looking at something accurately.
Yes.
When I look at page 3, I believe it is, of our replacement, the all funds summary,
Mhm.
it says property taxes, $7.7 million.
Correct.
And when I look at the taxable assessed value and the proposed tax rate, we're at 6.2. I know I'm missing something, but I need you to provide me some clarity.
Yes. So included in the property taxes, it's not just the real estate taxes, but it's also the personal property and penalties and interest.
Thank you.
So if you turn to page 9, you can
Those
see the
numbers are really
breakdown.
small.
Right?
Thank you. That's helpful. David,
Jen, can I go back to one of the things that you shared at the beginning on the replacement CIP pages, where you talked about the shaded light blue?
Yes.
So that I'm clear, one of the items added in the light blue is, and actually that we are now planning to receive money in FY '24. Am I right? Is that how I'm reading this?
That's correct. Yes,
For the Lime Kiln Bridge rehabilitation.
correct.
And so that 1.6, almost 1.7 was not on the previous replacement sheets. And so that bears significant acknowledgement, that $1.7 million for one of our aging failing
Absolutely.
bridges. So I just want to point that out. And I know that that's work that was maybe done by, Jeff on his way out and a lot of people, and just want to call attention to that. And then of course, also the other lightly shaded areas regarding Moses Mill Road bridge repairs. And that kind of is shifting around the money on previous CIP pages where we're going to maybe take that on in FY '25 and '26. This is adjusting a little bit, but again, anytime that we have access to VDOT funds because of our good work, it just bears me repeating, thank you.
Absolutely.
And not just the comment that it's in a shaded blue and don't worry about it. It's VDOT funding it. It's $1.6, $1.7 million next year. That's huge. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much for that.
I wish I could take the credit.
David, I would echo especially the Lime Kiln Bridge, which was recently downgraded for tonnage that's allowed on there and inconveniencing those folks in that neck of the woods. Fairwinds folks will get some of the brunt of delivery trucks and things of that nature. So thank you for recognizing that. And thus I hope that staff will continue to keep projects on here so that we can all be aware be reminded when they're taking place.
Absolutely.
Any other questions of Jen? This is your time to ask questions and mull over topics relative to the budget. You do see in our regular scheduled meeting, the item for your consideration of approval of the budget. But I'm suggesting that when we get to that, it's a placeholder. We will continue our public hearing to the 19th because we still don't have any surprises, pleasant or otherwise, from the state and our legislators. and plan to address and consider the budget on the 19th. So unless there are any objections to that.
Can I clarify just in my mind,
Please.
some thinking?
Hold that mic a little closer.
Sure. So
Thank you, Chuck.
as far as one-time funding, in our budget, we talked obviously about personal property taxes, car tax. And we went and we had a lot of discussion about that. And we realized that in this particular year, used cars are incredibly valuable, but that could change next year. And so we did some adjustment on the percentage. We all know this, but we expected, we kind of rationalized that could be one-time funding to an extent. That large increase could be kind of one-time funding. And then also just in my mind, we've got $300,000 in the budget. So that I'm clear, it's carryover. We expect to have a surplus from FY22. And in lieu of it going to fund balance, it will end up in this budget. So it's not that we're taking $300,000 from fund balance and $300,000 from a surplus. It's another one-time infusion, much like the car tax, into our operating budgets. And I just call attention to that because, again, this year's budget is significantly higher than last year's. And there's some significant expenses in this year's budget that will stay with us. And there's $500,000, several hundred, hundreds of thousands of dollars in just one-time funding in this budget that I just want to be clear on, because sometimes when in the years that I've been on council, we have not typically programmed in some of those carryover funds for operating expenses, if you will. So I just, in my mind, wanted to kind of let that be said out loud, just so that if I'm not here at a future budget cycle, that is in your minds, so that we're very cautious on how we do things. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, that you are correct. We are using those one-time funds, if you will, especially the carryover money. The rationale was that is the money that's going to equipment replacement and capital improvement. So we could have reduced those, but instead of doing that, we took it from that carryover and put it in the equipment replacement capital improvements, because we didn't want to get behind to there. So it's not really the operational, if you will, but it was a way of making sure we handle our operational expenses and don't short those two funds in the short term. That was the rationale. We could have cut some of the true operating costs somewhere and made up the difference, but that's how we decided. I recommend it to you to handle it.
It's helpful. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you. That's kind of why I wanted to say it and kind of hear that again from you, but just also just in my mind, it's being very cautious on how we budget from year to year. Thank you.
Mr. Alligood.
To extend that thought, whatnot, we received from ARPA for ARPA money this year, and I'm rounding, almost $10 million. And it's
9.2,
9.2. All
not
right,
quite
so
10.
closer to 9. Okay, so the point that I'm leading to is how much of that money is one-time money that we're spending that will be a continuing expense, which was Mr. Ziegler's point about continuing expenses, that will have to be made up with non-ARPA money next year.
None. So far, all we've asked you to do is put it into infrastructure, and that is my intention.
And so it's
It's a one-time project. It's going to be Jackson Street or Jackson Avenue Phase 1. It's going to be those types of similar projects. We allocated some of it. What did we allocate earlier? That was the
2.3 million to the capital improvements fund, with 2 million earmarked for bridge repairs.
that was the main, the West Nelson Street Bridge. So no, we're not planning on using any of that money for operations.
Very good. We used some of that money for personnel bonuses, and that got shifted around.
That was the CARES Act money, not the ARPA.
CARES Act.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's running together
I hear
already.
Good problem to have with lots of pots of money, trying to figure out how it gets used and how best to use it.
And are we creating a continuing expense? That's was Mr. Ziegler's point with this expense, with the expenditure of that funds there.
I would suggest the wage increases that we're looking at with the modifications for the next fiscal year, those are the biggest reoccurring expenses that we are acknowledging and will need to carry forward unless there's some massive technology changes or massive reductions in revenue. But look forward to what the state delivers in a budget and that supports our projects. We need to put our energy and efforts on lobbying our legislators to make sure that with the changes that they're looking to make at the state level, it's not at the sacrifice of the services for our citizens. So any other items regarding budget? Again, for those who recently came in, we will take this up on a regular meeting, but plan to continue it to May 19th for consideration when we get to that point. If there's nothing else, we will stand adjourn and reconvene in 10 minutes and be in your seats at 7, please.
They're actually operated from there.
What else is going on in your life, Gene?
Relatively good business. I say, you're
You're welcome to. If David's going to be the only one, I mean, just reminding me he has the.
I'm sure. Hate to just front to that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
There must be some. I would assume it'd be a bit short.
I didn't print it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. Welcome to the Thursday, May 5th edition of the Lexington City Council. I'd like to call the meeting to order and offer a special welcome to Washington and Lee students who will be presenting shortly. And first, if you all will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Next, I'd like to take a point of personal privilege. Anybody that's lived in Lexington over the past 20 years and everyone that lives in Lexington for the coming decades will feel the presence and impact of Joan Manley, who passed away, I believe, last week. She was an amazing figure in our community who moved here as a paraplegic and ran all over town and made her way each and every day. On a point of personal privilege, I recall when I was running the Lexington to Buena Vista road race and was pulling the hill up to Buena Vista, and she went whizzing by me in her wheelchair and mocked me. She had a great sense of humor and great tenacity. We will miss her, but feel her presence. But I would ask you all to join me in a moment of silence for Joan. Thank you all very much. May we all endeavor to do as much and have as positive impact on our community as she did. Next is consideration of the agenda. I do want to point out 2 items. One, the item under 15.1, consideration of the budget and capital improvement plans. We will continue that public hearing and consideration to the May 19th meeting and will not be taking action this evening. And the other is I have double booked, and at a point in time in the meeting, I will depart and turn the responsibilities of running the meeting over to Vice Mayor Alexander. And unless there are any other changes or modifications to the agenda, we will adopt it as presented. It is so adopted. First item under 4.1 are proclamations. And each year or each meeting, we have the opportunity to have various proclamations. And tonight, we're fortunate enough to have 4 items that we're celebrating. I don't believe there's anyone here associated with the Foster Care Awareness Month. So I will not read the full proclamation, but will acknowledge and that Foster Care Awareness Month in Lexington during the month of May. Intercept has done a great job of educating people, training people, and helping children in our community who are in need of foster care. So I encourage you to be more acquainted with Intercept and encourage folks to pause during the month of May and give thanks for foster care awareness and the support that we can offer to foster children and foster parents. And with that, sharing the joy this evening, and would like to call on Chuck Smith to present the National Police Week. And Chuck, if you'd like to come forward, and we'd ask the officers to come forward as well to receive this proclamation. Pull that microphone over to you, Chuck.
Yes, Officers Lombardi and Paget. This is a proclamation expressing the appreciation of the mayor and city council of Lexington, Virginia to local law enforcement officers and support staff. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day and the week in which May 15th falls as National Police Week. And whereas the men and women of the law enforcement agencies serving the city of Lexington, county of Rockbridge, the town of Glasgow, and the city of Buena Vista provide a vital public service by safeguarding the rights and freedoms of citizens in the Rockbridge area. And whereas safety of our citizens is a primary goal of local, state, and national government, and whereas law enforcement is one of the few chosen professions that require the willingness to, at any moment, put themselves in harm's way to protect others. And whereas since the first recorded death in 1791, more than 21,000 law enforcement officers in the United States have made the ultimate sacrifice, dying in the line of duty. And whereas the Lexington Police Department, Rockbridge County Sheriff's Department, Buena Vista Police Department, Buena Vista Sheriff's Department, Glasgow Police Department, Rockbridge Regional Jail, and Virginia Military Institute Police are comprised of the finest officers, supervisors, administrative, and support staff that can be found within the profession. Now, therefore, we, the mayor and Lexington City Council, call upon all citizens of Lexington, Virginia, to observe the week of May 15th through May 21st, 2022, as Police Week, during which all of our citizens may join in commemorating law enforcement officers, past and present, who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so, have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens. And we urge all citizens to take the time to thank those in law enforcement for the important service they provide to all of us. We further call upon all citizens of the city of Lexington to observe May 15th through May 21st, 2022, as Peace Officers Week in honor of those law enforcement officers who, through their courageous deeds, have made the ultimate sacrifice to their community or have become disabled in the performance of duty. And let us recognize and pay respects to the survivors of our fallen heroes, adopted this day, 5 May 2022.
Step in there, Chuck. Let Janie shoot you.
I got back.
Oh.
I believe so.
Yes, sir. Please take that to the chief with our appreciation for the work that you and your team do. Thank you for being here. I'm concerned that our EMS and fire folks are out on a call and not here, but we'd also like to recognize May 15 through 21, 2022 as National EMS Week and have a proclamation to that end, but we'll deliver that to the firehouse for their benefit. At this time, I'd ask the city manager to join me at the podium. You can stay on that side or you're fine. This is since Jeff Martone has left us. He was our Public Works Director and he has gone to take care of family business, but want to recognize National Public Works Week, May 15 through 21, 2022, Ready and Resilient. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the people of the city of Lexington. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals who are engineers, managers, and employees at all levels of government and the private sector who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supplies, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our citizens. And whereas it is the public interest for the citizens, civic leaders, and children in the city of Lexington to gain knowledge of and to maintain an ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the year 2022 marks the 62nd Annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association, be it now, or by now, be it now resolved, I, Frank Friedman, Mayor of the City of Lexington and Lexington City Council, do hereby designate the week of May 15 through 2021, May 15 through 21, 2022, as National Public Works Week. I urge all citizens to join with representatives of the American Public Works Association and government agencies in activities, events, and ceremonies designed to pay tribute to our public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our national health, safety, and quality of life. Adopted this 5th day of May 2022. Not only Cinco de Mayo, but also National Public Works Week. Thank you, and take this to the Public Works Department for all the work that they do. That's all you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will pass that along to our staff, and thank you, City Council as well.
Thank you all very much, and grateful to have such good people to work with in our supporting our community. Next, we have presentations, and the first presentation is from W&L student engineering teams, and ask the city manager to introduce this subject.
Mr. Mayor, as you commented earlier, we have very fortunately have these two teams from W&L, these student engineering teams working on a capstone project. They've done great work for us, and with very little support from staff, have worked hard on a project in preliminary engineering for a project in Jordan's Point Park, and also on a project to monitor and look at our interceptor on the town branch area of the city. So without any more time or taking any more, saying much more, I should say, I'll just let those teams come up and make their presentation. I guess you can flip and see who wants to come up first.
Rock, paper, scissors. Good evening and welcome to you all. We'll ask that you, for our benefit, introduce yourselves by name and where you're from originally as you make your presentations.
Hi there, I'm Izzy Shaffrey. I'm kind of a local. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm a senior.
I'm Jack Rollins, and I am from Fairfax, Virginia.
I'm William Bayer. I'm from Kilifi, Kenya.
Beautiful. Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to let us come and present our project to you. What we did this year was our year-long engineering capstone project, and this originally started in conjunction with the city's Public Works Department. And when it first became proposed to us, we had the project proposal of evaluating the town branch current trunk line capacity, and as well as maybe include as well 10-year storm events to see how the trunk line could deal with strain, and we could identify areas of pinch points and areas of weakness. So in future development projects, those would be the areas of concern for improvement. And all three of us will go through the different aspects of our project. It shouldn't be too long of a presentation, but feel free to ask questions if they come up, or if you want to keep them at the end, that works too for us. So essentially, we decided to do the capacity analysis of the main town branch trunk line, which starts right near Oak Grove Cemetery and ends near Jordan's Point. It's around 2 miles long, and you can see in this visual right here, within the blue is the entire service area. It's a pretty significant part of our Lexington community, taking in a lot of water usage and waste flow. And so it was really essential to us to do our best in evaluating and going out into the field and confirming essentially all the trunk line diameters, the elevations, the manhole IDs. And I'll show you in a little bit what we did in our physical field work, but it was a pretty large task just to verify so that we could construct and model an accurate model in Civil 3D. And so, as I had mentioned before, one of the most essential components of our project was to go out into the city and identify each manhole that goes into the trunk line, get the X and Y coordinates, get the invert depths of the manholes, and get the pipe diameters. And all this information was just helpful for us to be able to construct a very accurate and reflective model of the city's sewer system. And so you can see a couple of visuals of us in the field.
Okay, so after collecting all this data, we basically have what we need to construct a skeleton for this model. We have the locations, we have pipe sizes, what they're made of, but there's still a pretty big in-between step between constructing the model and actually doing any advanced analysis. That's calibrating the model. In order to do this, we needed rainfall data, which is publicly available, as well as we needed flow data, which was generously provided by the Public Works Department. And essentially, we wanted to compare the flow data that's actually going through the system at the final manhole, and we wanted to sort of fine tune our model so that what happened in the flow device following a storm was actually accurately represented by our model. And in this diagram, you can see the blue line is what's going through the final manhole. That's the flow device giving us our readings, and the green is what our model's producing. So it creates a pretty accurate representation of what's going on. And now that we had this, it was time to really test the limits of the system and push to see what the capacity is. These different sections are decided based on where there are significant jumps in diameter in the system, because that's where you're going to see the most change in capacity. And these numbers are in million gallons per day.
All right, on the final part of our analysis was to determine which sections show the most constraint or which ones would be a limiting factor when we decide to develop the city or in case of a huge rainstorm event. So we input a 10-year storm that happened over a 24-hour period, and we noticed that the beginning section had a lot of constraint. The pipe diameters there were around 6 inches to 8 inches compared to the end near Jordan's Point, which were as large as 20 inches in diameter. So the first section there is strained, and also in the middle, just before you get to Diamond Street, like where VMI is constructing that new building, I think it's a swimming pool, whatever the building is. Yeah, right around that area, there's a lot of strain. So we realized that it's likely to flood. Those manholes are likely to surcharge should there be a storm event or even more buildings added upstream. Oh, that was the next section too. So I think the city wanted to add a few buildings upstream of the first manhole near Stonewall Jackson. And we determined that if that to add around 60 houses, that would add 0.05 cubic feet per second of flow. And that would actually strain the model a lot more. It would strain the trunk line a lot more because currently it's almost at capacity. You can see the red represents that, well, that's at a strain. And if you're to add more upstream of that, then you're only making the situation much worse. Yeah.
And so that basically summarizes what our year effort towards our project was. Essentially, we just hoped to compile just a visual of both the capacity and also model any future situations such as a 10-year storm event or adding additional strain in terms of development projects upstream. And yeah, we are grateful for the city to allow us to practice our engineering skills and be able to have a real world application to these skills that we've garnered over the 4 years of our education. Thank you.
Izzy, 2 questions for you real quick. One, does this flow that you were charting, does that run through Henry and Randolph? Okay. Very good. And did you have any large water events during the past year that you were able to, waiting for rain and then go running out into it to see what was going on?
Yeah, we had a little difficulty with that. We ended up using a storm event from 2 years ago, actually, instead. All the storms that we had found in this past year were basically non-significant in the hopes that we would have. But we had information from a storm from 2 years ago. It was a 3-day, I would say it was probably 2.8 inches of total water accumulation, which is pretty significant. And that's what we ended up modeling our storm. But it was unfortunate that as soon as we wanted the storm event, none wanted to show up. But this storm was significant enough that you could see in this model or in this diagram that there were significant upticks in the flow. As you can see, the blue line during the November 10th, essentially all the outflow of the pipe is non-significant. It's around 0.3 cubic feet per second. And then during those 3 days of storms, there's massive spikes, almost to 7 cubic feet per second, which is a massive increase. And so this was useful enough to be able to calibrate our wet weather storm event. And then, as Jack had mentioned, we also had the household water usage data per month for each manhole, which allowed us to do a dry weather base flow.
Terrific. Mr. Alligood.
Thank you for your work. Great.
Yeah.
I have a question. On the reds where the constraint existed, did you determine what the pipe size would optimally ought to be to reduce the constraint?
No, we did not check for that, but these pipe diameters, increase in size from the beginning to the end. So around this area right here, we have 6 and 8 inches. So we could double that to maybe 16, but the next pipe section is only 10 inches. So that would be a limiting factor to.
Right.
Yeah, so we didn't check for that, but potentially if we're to increase those to 10 inches, then we could get more capacity. But if we're to make a bigger capacity at the beginning, it will eventually lead towards constraint like much lower, like down the stream. Makes sense.
And so improving the size downstream would allow more flow, of course.
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
upstream too,
Right. And so those red zones, I was just wondering, because it's a continuing issue in the city for our drainage system. And we're spending money already to improve that. And this is good information. And thank you very much for it. This is be very helpful.
Another thing that happens with any areas of pinch points, typically what engineers will do or infrastructure projects is that they choose to seal the top of the manhole where the pinch point is. And unless you want to spend a lot of money replacing all the pipe diameters, which you're welcome to do, the best solution is typically just they seal the top to just add a little bit pressure and force the flow through. So
That's called bolting the tops of the manholes in place. It's happened.
Yes. So question, I'm curious if any of the manholes that you investigated were bolted already.
Well, when we were down at VMI, we did run into some fair amount of difficulty where they were bolted down, but that was for security reasons versus
Okay.
versus any sealing, but none that we encountered were sealed in that sense.
Got it. Well, 2 other questions. You mentioned that you measured all the pipe diameters. Did you do that visually at each manhole or did you run a video camera? I'm just curious, like in the areas between that, are we clear that it was the same diameter from manhole to manhole?
We did it physically at each manhole. We had a PVC pipe that we had put notches for every inch. And so we were able to get to the bottom of each pipe diameter pipe, and then we'd bring it to the top and kind of do a little mental math. And we had a couple of members of the public's work with us. So we'd be like, okay, we've gotten 8 inches in diameter. Can you verify that we're not completely inaccurate? And we also we were given access to the city's GIS database, which some of the manholes do include that information. It's just not necessarily consistent throughout the entire database. So we had we had some virtual data, but also we did some physical verification as well.
Got it. And then the final question, I'm asking for an engineering guess, I think here, but so you mentioned that around Oak Grove Cemetery, the diameters were 6 to 8, and then it went up to 20 down towards VMI. Was there a reason for that? I mean, was that by design, or is it just that the trunk line further up was way older and they've just added on? I mean, what was your thought on that?
I think age has something to do with it. It's probably just that's all that was necessary when they were first put in. We don't have exact ages for all of them, but the guys in public works said a few of them are over 100 years old.
Okay.
I'm the professor that ran these folks, so I'm gonna add some clarifying comments here, just because.
If you can step up and please use the microphone so folks that are tuning in can hear you well.
It's the top. It's the top of the sewer system. So the pipes are going to increase as the sewer system gathers flow going down. Those 6 or 8s might be perfectly sized if you have very little flow or the flow that matches them. But as the system comes in, it continually adds going all the way to Jordan's point, because that's the bottom of the sewer line.
So if you add development above that,
if you add development above that, what our calculation shown, granted, it's a very small contribution, the base flow is.
Right.
In other words, just the personal usage. What's running the capacity of this system is inflow and infiltration into the system during rain events. So if you look at that graph again, at 0.3, that's what folks are using. And if it were a completely sealed system, you would only be paying the wastewater treatment plant for 0.3 MGD every day instead of for 8 MGD during storm events. And so that's the, when you ask if you have capacity or not, the base flow is a very small part, but there's some pretty large unknowns when you get close to modeling these systems, right? We didn't have a flow meter up at the 6 and 8 inch pipe. So we don't know exactly how that behaves. We only had a flow measurement down at the end. What we did know in modeling our storms was that there'd never been any significant overflow to date. So we could look and try and get that 10-year storm in there without showing a significant overflow at any point. Those places in the line that came closest were up at the top and down at the bottom. And one thing up at the top that could be the cause is, I think it goes, if you remind me, it goes 8, 8, 6, 8. And that's something hard for a series of pipes to make it through, because you have a pinch point. And even though you think the pinch point is in that 6, it really backs it up to the other manholes as well. So the red lines don't mean that, oh my gosh, there's a terrible problem in your system. It just means that the level of certainty that we could have to walk in here and say, hey, everything's okay, is not great in those locations. I don't want to say there's a significant issue.
So if there were a problem in the future, the red sections are where they would most likely
They
show
would be
up.
most likely occur. And so the top of the system is, again, you have less play because the pipes are smaller. So if you have a cracked pipe or an infiltration issue, it's going to, again, have a much more significant issue at the top. And the bolting down, although that's an okay technique, you have to be a little bit careful, because these systems are meant to run gravity. So that means if there's a crack in the pipe, what happens? The storm water comes into the pipe. You bolt down all these manholes and you pressurize them. That means when you have a crack in the pipe, you're putting the water that's in the pipe, the sewage pipe, even at very low concentrations, back out into the environment. So they are good short-term solutions, but even DEQ in Virginia is not overwhelmed with people transferring it from a gravity to a pressure system. So it's just, those two pieces are good to recognize.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to show this here with regard to your question. So like the top structures, if you can see my mouse, those only taking this much flow, like there's only so many developments here. But as you get lower, all this flow from houses around this area and even out here, they all come towards the end and meet up. So like the pipes, they have to be much larger to account for all that flow.
Got it. Thank you.
Clearly, the density at VMI contributes substantially, much bigger pipes. But thank you all very much for your presentation. Congratulations in advance on graduation next or later this month. And feel free to stay for the rest of our meeting. And again, thank you for your efforts, and come back and visit Lexington.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
While Janie's firing that up, I'm going to turn the gavel over to Vice Mayor Alexander, and we'll be departing in a couple of minutes. But greatly appreciate the work of the students. Fun way to spend your senior year, and to see it all culminate here in the month of May.
Yeah, just the packet, I guess.
Hi, so I guess we'll just introduce ourselves first. My name is Chapin Bassi, Chapin, it's a unique name.
My name's Alec Mulkern.
Where are you guys from?
I'm from New Hampshire, far away.
I'm from Massachusetts, also far away.
Hey, I'm Brett Schwab. I'm from Highland, Maryland.
Yeah, and we'd just like to echo what Izzy was saying, which is thank you for having us here. And then I'd also like to make a special thank you for Arnie and Jeff, who we already heard earlier, stepped away, but they were both very good mentors for us. And we felt very honored that they would take so much time of their day to meet with us and walk through Jordan's Point with us and just show us how engineering is really done from a work perspective. And we really appreciate all the time that you've put in for us. So thank you so much. So I'll start off just by giving a brief overview of our project and background, and then Brett will talk about sort of the first steps and how it all came together. And then Alec will talk about our final design and what we will actually be presenting to you. So we initially were given a project for just a general improvement of Jordan's Point. And so we had the freedom to sort of choose a specific project or an area of focus that we wanted. Anything that we thought like we were given our imagination to improve Jordan's Point, which was really a pleasure. So we had a packet where there was a previous contractor came in to give some suggestions on how the area could be improved. And the top suggestion was a canoe kayak dock in the area. Now, this was done prior to the dam removal. So the river flows were more adept for canoeing and kayaking when that suggestion was made. And so when we started researching this area of expertise in the city, we kind of noticed that people, one, weren't utilizing the Maury as much for canoeing and kayaking. And two, the river flow fluctuations were so drastic that it wasn't so feasible for a dock, for a river dock, because it would have to rise and flow, rise and fall with the river, or it would have to just get covered or taken out for the wet seasons, which, and especially in the summertime, the river flows we were noticing, especially the past year, were so low that, I mean, it wouldn't even be possible to canoe or kayak. So we sort of had to change plans and say, just come up with another idea. And this, so then with that, we thought maybe a sort of picnic family area. And there's this beautiful point right next to where they took the dam out, where it's sort of a grassy area right now, a little overgrown and not much use is being put in, but it's right next to the river and has great access for the river. So then our initial idea was just to make 2 concrete patios, or actually we hadn't even settled on concrete yet, but just 2 patios where one was at a higher elevation than the other. But then we also had to focus on making sure that it was ADA accessible, and so improving handicap accessibility to the park as well. So with that, I will pass it on to Brett.
Yeah. For just reference, if you look at figure 1 in the packets, that's from the LPDA master plan that we're working off of. Once we had decided that we were not going to go through and expended some effort trying to rationalize the dock and officially decided we were going to go with our next, that point right there was already the second highest priority on the master plan from the contractor. We kind of hit the ground running with it and decided that's what we just wanted to keep going, do the next priority. And as Chapin mentioned, one of our highest priorities with this feature would be to not only extend access to the river, but access for everyone. We really wanted to follow ADA considerations just to make sure that if we're putting in something new, that it's for everyone. A big part of that was that we also wanted to come that we wanted to include in the feature was that we were careful about permitting. It was going to be a huge problem if we were too close to the water in terms of permitting. That would have at least it's extended, I think, guessing around like 6 months is something I had heard just from being too close to the water. So that was really played into our design with what we ended up with. But to get there, we first, we took some laser scans of the whole area. We had the whole 3D surface represented graphically on the computers of that area. And then we kind of were able to use that for elevation heights and things like that to create a 3D model of our feature that we were then put on top of the 3D surface. It was just very helpful for all the elevations and heights and things like that to actually get an idea of what this is going to look like. In terms of once we had all of that data set, we went through with our design of the 2 concrete slabs. And from there, we had it includes ramps that keep the ADA accessibility and also doesn't I wouldn't say it's not that it is a complete plan for the feature that we have, but it doesn't obstruct any future additions to that area. I think that's hand it over to Chapin.
Alec. I'd like to invite you to look at the final figure in our section of the packet. It's a 3D render of our design. That is, as it currently stands, 60% design. We are hoping that in the future, the city will be in a position to take those designs to 100% and hopefully implement our design. It features a couple of key design features. Like Brett mentioned, there's the upper slab of concrete, and the lower slab of concrete with the ADA accessible ramp that goes between them to add wheelchair access to right up close to the river. The features are, I'd like to note, above high water line, which is very important for permitting and also structural stability. We were able to use our 3D contour map to optimize the location of our patio areas so that we could minimize the level of excavation that was needed in the area. The maximum excavation that is likely needed is only about 3 or 4 feet deep. The design also does not interfere with the old bridge area, and so there's less permitting needed in that regard as well. We have curbing around all of the edges to make it a little bit safer. We don't want anyone getting too close to the edge and being able to fall off. It's not a big drop, but just keeping it safe. And on the right-hand side, there is gravel stairs that allow for more direct access if somebody does not want to use the path, the ramp and the slabs, and just wants to go straight down to the river and go fishing, then they may. Another issue is drainage. The slabs will be sloped to allow for natural water runoff. And we made sure our location of our retention walls means that there'll be no pooling of water in any corners or anything like that. And we should hopefully avoid any drainage issues. So thank you very much, City Council, for hearing us. And thank you to Arnie and Jeff and Professor Straub for this opportunity. And if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you. It's so good to see that there are some plans that are so detailed and that we've been waiting for so long. And I don't know how much longer we have to wait to actually make it come to fruition, but hopefully not too long, and you'll get to see the fruits of your labor. Council, do you have questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. The gravel stairs, I'm trying to understand, like, how would they be composed? Would it be like a composite, like cement kind of thing? I mean,
it would likely be kind of a wood frame, something around like a 2x8 fill with a gravel fill, just kind of in our model, they're laid in there with at the elevations they would be at. They're set to also be level with the platforms at least one of the steps each, just to kind of be able to transfer between the two. But it would kind of, it's almost a separate feature from the cement,
So
from the concrete, rather than, so that it's just kind of
yeah.
an additional piece.
So when the river level is high, the lower steps would be submerged. Is that right? Or am I
No, they
mistaken?
kind of, they end right at the same spot as
Okay.
the yeah, it's all.
Yeah,
Okay.
currently what exists is just a walking path just down the slope. And this just is more for aesthetics, and also it's just a path for people aside from the ADA accessible feature that we have. We just wanted a walking path that people could take. And since it is such an elevation change, that we added those different levels. So they're kind of like steps. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great use of that space because it is a prime area to go in. And like I said, for ADA accessibility, there's not too many areas because of the grade change. So I really like this design for that particular space. Roughly, what do you think the dimensions are of this pad?
It's the top is about 30 feet wide by 15 feet deep, and the bottom is 30 feet wide by about 22 feet deep.
Okay. Thank you too for looking into the permitting, because that's always an issue doing anything near or in the river.
Anyone else?
I just want to say thanks for taking on a practical project, and same with the first group. I mean, and your both of your group's ability to explain it to laymen. So that's really important for engineers to be able to explain what you did, and I really appreciate it. But I think that both projects, and this one in particular, because it's so public, like this is something that the city has really wanted to do. We removed the dam and we want to improve Jordan's Point Park. And this is something that, like Marilyn said, I mean, it's really nice for you to take one concept, get it a little bit closer to fruition, for us to see what it would look like, and to share the dimensions, and for us to be able to go down and walk it, it's really helpful. I don't think you all realize it might be a senior project, but to the city of Lexington, this kind of project and their project, it's really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that compliment. It was an honor to do it for you guys. And also a lot of that credit goes to Professor Straub for getting us in connect with Arnie and Jeff and with this project too.
Lexington is so fortunate to have institutions right here for us to call upon you for your expertise. And you're offering us a very impressive project, 2 projects actually. And it's just good for the entire community. And we thank you for both of these endeavors.
Thank you for your consideration.
Charles, did you have anything?
No, one thing. And I thank you as well. It was very interesting to see your project presented. The thought that I have, did you develop an estimate of what it would cost to do it?
Yes, we've been kind of beating around the bush on that, because, well, yeah, we did send an estimate in. Yeah.
So the estimate I did was based on historical capabilities, and mostly recognizing that it's a hard place to build something, right? The concrete is not easily accessible. They're gonna have to pump it. It's a little bit more expensive. We don't know what's underground yet. And I think it was in the 70,000 to 110,000 range. And that's mostly due to construction costs. And we've done a fairly conservative design. You notice the wall on one side of the structure, that's essentially a retaining wall. That we have its own structure there. There haven't been any soil analysis done, and we're not sure what they put under the ground when they ripped out the dam. So you might dig down and find chunks of concrete. So that's why there's a pretty big range. And when I was talking to them earlier, we thought you might ask, how can you make it cheaper? If it wasn't within a budget, because that's often a question that comes about. And, what we would say is if you wanted to take away the upper slab, and then just provide the ADA access down and down through the ramp to the lower slab, you could probably lower that by 25 to 30%, that cost. And so, that the most of the cost is in concrete, and the ramp's a little bit technical to do. You could also take off that little walkway, but that's not a significant portion. So you're still in the, and I don't know, I'm not as familiar with what the cost would be here with a less expensive concrete contractor, but it's still going to have to be built to fairly significant standards just because it is on a slope and you don't want it to go into the river. But so that gives you sort of a ballpark figure. But if it does go to it, then maybe eliminating that top slab is to make the project go forward, right? You always want things to get going.
Right. We'd like to see it go forward. I would like to see it go
Yeah,
forward.
yeah, I think so.
And even if the top slab is eliminated, you can still use that spaces for seating or what have you. The
It's a
space can
grassy
still
area.
be used.
Yeah,
as a
and you
grassy
can
area.
still excavate it to make it flatter too.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just have one thing. Thanks to both groups. If you didn't know, we have 3 engineers up here. I never actually went into engineering. I went into sales, but a practicing engineer. So we're all geeking out up here. Chewing on data and looking at models. And so from that perspective, I wanted to thank you for presenting what you presented. This is good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you. And a hint to my peers, the longer we wait to do this, the more it's going to cost.
Right.
The next presentation is about the bike pedestrian plan efforts. City Manager.
Thank you, Ms. Vice Mayor. As council recalls, we received a grant some months back from the Virginia Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to complete a comprehensive bike pedestrian plan for the city. And that plan was a technical assistance grant. And through the grant, we had a contractor hired to do the work for us. Staff really did not contribute tremendously to this effort. Arnie, Jeff, and myself were involved in a number of virtual meetings with the individuals with the grant and with the Intermodal Office of Investment as they sat in on some of the updates with us. The consultant that was hired was EPRPC, and we have Todd Gordon as the senior planner here to do a presentation, and Nick, whose last name I can't recall right now. My apologies. And they will go through the plan results, and there's no action necessary for this because this is a plan provided by these agencies and it doesn't require council's approval. If you wanted to, that'd be fine, but the plan stands as it is. Your comments tonight, any questions you have, any concerns will be tweaked into the plan, I believe, but I'll let Nick and Todd go from here.
Thank you, everyone. Todd, if you want to. Oh, go first. Okay. So my name is Nick Britton. I'm actually with Michael Baker International, and Todd Gordon also worked on this with EPR. We started this project, as mentioned, as a grant from the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. So what we're going to do, I will go with the agenda real quick. I'm going to go through the planning process pretty quickly. Todd will go into some of the details, but really this was a step-by-step process in terms of identifying like data collection, identifying needs, working with the public and stakeholders, then making recommendations and prioritizing those recommendations. And then finally, we're going to go over a little bit in terms of funding and kind of how this can actually get implemented. So real quick, just in terms of what this project was intended to do. The Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment started this as a way of implementing a number of different goals that the specifically VTrans has. And so looking at the VTrans needs that have been identified across the state, Lexington identified bike and pedestrian plans as one of the needs. And so as you can see, some of the eligible activities are making those connections. So we're looking at multimodal connections here. not just bikes and pedestrians, but also sort of just the entire network. So you're extending trips, you're making it easier for people to get from certain places, even if they're using multiple modes of transportation. So the outcomes of this, the intention was to look at the data, obviously, and then work with stakeholders and identify needs through engagement and identify those needs through the data collection. And then finally, with those needs identified, work on a prioritization process in the matrix for that to determine what types of projects may be most impactful from a kind of metric standpoint, but also potential for funding and sort of have some sort of tactical viability and through implementation. So the public engagement process, we did the data collection kind of, and sort of went off, collected data. We worked with Jeff, we worked with Arnie to get a lot of that information. We looked at a significant amount of data like crashes, pedestrian activity and things like that. But one of the big pieces that's a little harder to get quantitatively is stakeholder engagement. So we really wanted to kind of target some of that. So what we did between October and December of 2021, we had virtual meetings, of course, because that was sort of the kind of the goal that were the sort of the MO then. We had 4 of these meetings that were advertised for public. So it was open to everyone. We sent it on, I think City broadcasted it on their social media, and it was put out to for anyone in the public who's interested in this plan to sign up for one of the meetings. So we offered 4 different meetings at 4 different times on different days to kind of up the potential or reduce the potential for conflicts. And then we also worked on other meetings directly, specifically with some stakeholders. We had a group that was focused more on the downtown business area. We had university representatives from both colleges, and then we also had members of the regional organizations like the NPO and the PDC. So that was one big piece of it. So that was a push that was sort of separate from the online data collaboration push. I'll just point out the image that you see on here. What we launched at the same time was, I think it's called Social Pinpoint. Social Pinpoint. So what it is basically a site that allows people to go to a map and really identify specifically locations that they're interested in, and they can tell us for whatever reason they're interested in it. So it could be a place they like to go, a place they can't go, a place they think is particularly unsafe or has challenges, or somewhere they like to see bike lanes and things like that. And what it allows people to do is see what everyone else has said, and then sort of it fosters a little bit of sort of that disconnect, or it connects people, even though it's not not in the same room, people are still having somewhat of a conversation. So you can see on here the kind of the concentrations of the comments across the city, and we can show more. There's more information about this, and obviously in the report as well. But basically, the different types. There were different types of pins for safety, for needs, for things like that. So we really looked at this as a way and combined it with the stakeholder data, stakeholder information, to really kind of focus in on those qualitative needs and qualitative items that don't necessarily show up in the data sometimes.
All right, thanks very much. So there are a huge number of potential bicycle and pedestrian improvements available out there, from sidewalks, that's the basic, and you've got quite a bit of that, the crosswalks that connect them, bicycle lanes, sharrows, those are shared lane markings that identify where bicycles are welcome in the street. You have some of those on South Main as it exists. There are some more innovative ideas like slow streets, where you take low speed, low volume streets and implement traffic calming in a way that creates a space that's safe for cars and pedestrians and bicycles to share the space. So our challenge was to look at a very large sort of nationwide toolkit of potential improvements and identify or select the improvements that we thought would work in Lexington. Now, it's no news to you that Lexington is a very challenging place to do infrastructure projects. You are a historic city. You are a largely built out, relatively densely developed city. The roads that exist tend to be quite narrow. You tend to have very little available right-of-way along your roads. So it will continue to be a challenge to implement improvements in your transportation network. So the recommendations that we're showing here, we attempted to rely on those that were comparatively simple and comparatively cost-effective recommendations, acknowledging that funding to implement these recommendations will continue to be somewhat scarce. So that does not mean that other ideas that were thrown out by the public that didn't make it into this document are invalid or not possible, but we did try to stick to the easier, to abuse a term, the low-hanging fruit. So before we could make any recommendations, we made a very complete study of existing conditions. So that includes measuring the pavement width of all of the routes in Lexington. So existing pavement width, looking at where right-of-way was available, looking at existing traffic, as well as state-collected crash data. So where you've had safety incidents in the past. And looking at destinations, the places where people are likely to walk or bike to and from, and where you had existing sidewalks. So as we started this project, the city did not have available to it at that time a complete map of existing sidewalks. So we were able to use data that the city had already collected with respect to impervious surfaces in the city, which was kind of a stormwater consideration at the time, but we were able to use that data to isolate a map of existing sidewalks. So that's a useful tool going forward, I think. So the result of all this is sort of in consideration of those existing conditions, as well as the input from city residents that Nick mentions, our work with city staff, including your public works department prior to Jeff's departure, and our own experience in these types of projects in other communities, is to apply potential improvements to available spaces in Lexington streets. And that is summarized in the map that's on the screen here at a scale where you won't possibly be able to read it, but it's in your packet as well. So the result is this map of potential projects citywide. So this shows several dozen potential projects to add to the bicycle and pedestrian network. We have to acknowledge that these projects are going to be complex and that funding will be limited. So it is necessary to prioritize our efforts here. And so the next step in this process was prioritization of potential projects. And we did that by scoring potential projects based on several data factors. So we scored potential projects on 3 levels of priority: traffic level of stress, which is made up of the speed, traffic volume, number of lanes, and crash safety on various routes; community need, which is how useful might these projects be to the overall transportation network. And so there we're prioritizing projects that are adjacent to activity centers, near schools, looking at areas of population and employment density. And the state identifies equity emphasis areas. These are usually low income areas and others that rely especially on bicycle and pedestrian networks. And so we prioritized these things as community needs. And finally, project viability, where we've looked at the overall scale of corridors, existing right-of-way, other elements of connectivity and project readiness. This is also where we fold in, as Nick mentions, how likely are these projects going to be competitive when it comes to outside funding. So you have experience in that area when it comes to funding your projects through Smart Scale and other means. How competitive will projects likely be? So whipping all that together, the combined result is a shorter list in addition to the citywide map, but a shorter list of 7 or so individual segments that we think represent high priority improvements. These are the 7 priority projects are in no particular order. And I'm going to show you just a couple of those as examples. So first example is a potential pedestrian connection between Wallace and Houston streets. You can see on Wallace Street, you've got the Brubaker Fields and the city pool. So this is an important destination for recreation. Neighborhoods and residents in the area of Summit and Walker Streets have a hard time accessing this because there is no connection in this area without going a bit further north to get through. So we looked for a way to make this connection between Houston and Wallace, and that's shown here with a potential sidewalk and trail. We do need to acknowledge that this is one of those areas where you do not have existing right-of-way. And so part of this recommendation includes an area where you would need to work with private property to hopefully put through this connection.
Todd, that's a good point. And this is I know a lot of people go through here. Chuck and I were just saying we take this path. But as far as getting access from private property owners, I mean, do you have any experience with that? Are there incentives, or do people just usually, if they're willing to do it, that's your only option? Or do you have any suggestion on how to make that happen?
Sure. Well, the first thing to do is start having the conversation. And so there are two potential owners there. There's one residential, just a single family home, who could be a donor there. And the other is an apartment complex. And so the first thing to do is to have that conversation with them. And it may be that they are interested in making that connection as you are, and you can work something out. It may be that they would appreciate some sort of incentive. And while we can't give really specific guidance on that, perhaps the city can find something there, whether it's direct compensation or some other incentive for them. So yes, while for the most part, we looked for recommendations that didn't involve private property. You can't make this connection without it, because those are two private properties that abut each other. So we think it's a conversation worth having.
When it was Lexington High School at that school location now, that was a major shortcut for all of the students going that direction.
Yeah. One of the best ways to identify priority pedestrian projects is to look for where the grass doesn't grow, because it's used so much informally, and try to formalize those cut throughs.
I'm good. This is actually a question for you. It's for Leslie or Chuck or that apartment complex. Is that Heritage Hall? Okay, Heritage Hall. Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, so as I mentioned, there's 7 prioritized projects. I'm just showing 2 of those as examples. The other example is Spotswood Drive. Spotswood, because of its location and also its topography, is a really excellent bicycle street. It makes a good connection, relatively easy to use. Much of the street is quite wide, which gives you the room to stripe bicycle lanes within the existing pavement. A relatively effective and relatively inexpensive way to add that connection. So that covers the section from essentially from Houston to Preston. Shortly after Preston, at the hospital entrance, the road narrows a bit, and you end up with a pavement width that can't accommodate a bicycle lane within the existing pavement. So for that section, we've shown shared lane markings. So these are those sharrows, which is an emblem painted in the street to indicate the presence of bicycles to drivers. And so that's the simplest method. Of course, the less simple method would be to look maybe to the longer term of widening that pavement to accommodate a bicycle lane all the way. All right, so a little bit more about funding.
Yeah, so funding tends to be an art more than a science. And a lot of times, especially with bike and pedestrian projects, it's far more, it's easier to implement projects as like additions to larger projects. So when you have an opportunity to maybe work on a street and you're not just working on the actual bicycle part or the sidewalk or something like that, you're working on a larger thing. So Smart Scale, as you all know, is a pretty valuable tool for funding because for funding bike and ped projects, because the incremental cost of those projects tends to be, not always, but tends to be fairly low when you're comparing it to the rest of the project. However, the incremental score tends to be the benefit, I should say, when it's scored, can be much higher than you would expect with that incremental cost. So a lot of times, I think the recommendation is always to really find ways to piggyback on Smart Scale projects to get some of these implementations in place. It doesn't mean you can do, it could be a partial implementation because you're only talking about a certain block versus a larger stretch. But I do think that you get a much bigger bang for your buck when you're really looking at finding ways to add on these incremental projects to larger, bigger public works projects. Of course, VDOT also has two other programs that are smaller in scale, and of course, the funding's smaller. It's a little bit more competitive, but they're full funded projects. The Transportation Alternatives Program, I know the 81 corridor from Roanoke up Harrisonburg has a very a good history of funding projects. If you look down at Roanoke, for example, they use transportation alternative program money to do a lot of trail projects throughout their area. So it is a source of funding that can be used. It's not often always completely used. So there's always ways to get that, but it is one of the projects or one of the funding sources that VDOT has specifically for projects like this. And then, of course, Safe Routes to School, as we were just talking about the school access, this is exactly what those programs are meant for. VDOT does run this as well. Many of these are full funded programs. So, but the intent obviously is to have some sort of connectivity or access or safety benefit for routes that are on the school. So for example, the project earlier would be one of those where you'd look at that. And then finally, stepping away from the VDOT world and into more of the recreational world, some of the projects that we have in the list of projects are off-road projects, meaning that they're connections to various trails or potential connections to parks and things like that. So there is not a VDOT's not going to be really looking to fund these projects because there's no real right-of-way discussion, but it is an opportunity to use DCR's funding sources, and they have two programs: the Trail Access Grant Program and the Recreational Trails Program, that are not used as heavily sometimes, not every year. It kind of varies, but based on kind of what other, kind of what's in the hopper for a lot of these places. A lot of these projects wouldn't go into Smart Scale. They wouldn't go into the Transportation Alternatives Program necessarily, but they're definitely suited for that DCR funding. So there are a number of opportunities at the state level to do this. Of course, there's also local funding and things like that they could use to leverage some of these projects as well to make them more competitive, especially on the Smart Scale side. But I do think that there are a number of options that are sort of there for these kind of projects. It's just sort of finding the best way to implement them, phase them, and things like that. So that brings us to the end. Are there any questions? I assume there would have a little bit.
Thank you, council members.
Yeah, one of the suggestions you make are downtown streets toolkit. Can you explain that a little bit, what that is?
Sure. We kind of lumped together several options for downtown improvement into one toolkit. And so that includes crosswalks, probably the most obvious and most visible, but also additional street furniture, such as bike racks, sharrows on downtown streets as well. We also, we looked at those downtown streets. We sort of incorporated the fact that you already have a downtown plan, which you continue to work to implement. So that's very important. Looking at those streets, recognized that you do not have the ability to add bicycle lanes, for example, at least without removing on-street parking, which I know is a major hurdle. So I think we're looking at a kit of parts that includes crosswalks, shared use arrows for bicycles, street furniture, such as bicycle racks, and so on.
Charles, did you want to speak?
Thanks for your work. Two observations. One, I happened to see articles recently from Poland describing their bike ped pathway, and they use luminescent paint that obviously glows when light hits it and it gets dark, whatnot. And they showed pictures of it at night, and I thought that was very creative to do that. And they had different designs that spelled out the area, and I thought that was an interesting approach. The other observation that I have, and it's just strictly a picky little thing. The city of Lexington changed the name of New Market Place to Evergreen Place. And on your picture on page 22, of 36, it shows the wrong name.
Sure. We can get that fixed.
Yeah, it's easy. I just thought I'd say.
Sure.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, Todd and Nick. This has been a project in the works for a while. And it's taken a lot of time and effort on your parts to get input from the community and do all of the due diligence to provide us this document. And I've been on council long enough to know that this has been part of a long process. And I can remember, some of you might remember when Carrie Smout introduced this idea to us about a bike plan for the city. So wherever he is, I hope he's listening to this plan so that he will know that we are listening to our community and the needs of the community. And I really want to thank you for the hard work you're doing to advance this project. And it is something that is much in demand in this community.
Thank you. Well, it's worth noting that this is by far not the end of any process.
Right.
There's still
A
so
long
much
way
to be
to go.
done, but we hope this is a tool that's useful to staff as they continue to pursue a variety of things that they're pursuing.
Well, the wheels of government move very slowly, so we totally get it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Next on the agenda are public hearings, but there are no public hearings scheduled for this evening. And I believe at our next meeting on the 19th, there could be another one in regarding the budget and at least taking it up for consideration at that time. Next, we have on the agenda the consideration of the minutes. And we have 4 different sets. April 14th, City Council Work Session. April 21st, City Council Electoral Board Joint Work Session. April 21st, City Council Work Session. And April 21st, City Council Regular Meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, or changes that you all found? Okay. Hearing none, the minutes will stand approved as presented. And for those of you in the public who are here tonight and listening, the minutes of all of our meetings are readily available to you online on our website. Next, we have citizen remarks and comments, and we have one person signed up, and that is Mark Reed. And Mr. Reed, you've been before council before, so you know the rules.
Yeah, what's the time frame again?
3 minutes.
Right?
Yes.
I've never had a problem with restraining myself to 3 minutes of speaking to people.
If you don't mind giving the clerk your name and your address.
I'm Mark Reed, 614 Ross Road here in Lexington. Members, it's 8:17 PM on a Thursday evening. And I want you to know that as a 25-year retired Child Protective Services and foster care, Child Protective Services investigator and foster care specialist, I've removed children from homes, abused and neglected children from homes at 8:15 in the evening on a Thursday. I placed children that have been removed in foster homes at 8:16 PM on a Thursday evening. And as a former foster parent, I have received children into my home at 8:15 or 8:16 PM on a Thursday evening. Members, I don't know if you read the newspapers, daily newspapers, from even maybe 40 or 45 miles away, you would know that it is in fact Foster Care Awareness Month here in Virginia and throughout the country. You would also know that even though it took 2 years after it was passed into law, we now have a person who makes sure that local social services agencies do their job, hopefully so that children don't die, like has happened here in Lexington and Rockbridge County. So knowing what you know now and saying what I've said now in about 2 minutes, I think it wouldn't be a waste of time for one of you to reconsider and maybe just recognize foster children and specifically intercept youth services, as is in your proclamation that you or your mayor decided not to read today. I think it would probably be worth your time, my time, foster children's time, Lexington residents' time, Virginia residents and children's time to just read a damn proclamation. If you could just find the time. Okay, so thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Perhaps we can consider that near the end of our meeting, and hopefully you will stay around to hear that with us. Thank you. We don't have anyone else signed up. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak during this time about something that perhaps is not on the agenda? Thank you. So next we have on the agenda is the consent agenda. And there's only one item before us this evening for consideration on the consent agenda. Council, what's your pleasure on that?
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any remarks, comments, questions, discussion? This calls for a roll call vote and start with Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Mr. Sigler.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
And I think I can vote aye. And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And I'm not aware of any other unfinished business that was arranged to place on here this evening. So we can move on to reports and communications from our council members. And we'll start with the Blue Ridge Resources Authority. And I want to make one comment that our council members are charged with not only being represented here all the time, but we are also on numerous boards and commissions. And so your reports are always welcome and appreciated to keep us apprised of all the things that are going on in the community. And if we could go ahead and start with Chuck on that note.
Thank you. Blue Ridge Resource Authority will meet Monday. We'll have a hearing on our tipping fees and other rates, and very likely adopt the budget that's been presented to the rest of the authority board. As I stated last meeting, we are budgeting for no tipping fee increases, so no additional burden to solid waste disposal on the city. We also, FYI, are budgeting for a little over $300,000 surplus, which will be used, not designated yet, but longer term for capital improvements and long-term post-closure funding, so that when we get to the end of our landfill lifespan, we will have monies in place to cover the expenses involved with closing a landfill and monitoring the landfill afterwards. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those right now.
Anyone, questions? No? Okay. Main Street, Lexington.
Main Street, Lexington. I just have a reminder that Rock the Bridge will return on Saturday, June 11th from 5:30 to 10:30 p.m. That's all I have.
Short night. Planning Commission.
Planning Commission met on Thursday, April 28th. We had a conditional use permit to allow 101 North Jefferson Street, which is the former Beta Fraternity House, to be used as offices, and that was unanimously approved 4-0. We had an application by the city of Lexington to amend the zoning ordinance to replace accessory dwelling with accessory apartment in the use matrix, and that was unanimously approved 6-0. And both these items will come before council at our next meeting. And we continued our discussion of the planned unit development text amendment. And I'll just throw in a reminder for all of us, since we worked on the comprehensive plan, that the bike and ped plan, that was a important piece of our comprehensive plan, and it will help with planning both for that and in our CIP every year we tend to budget 35,000 for sidewalks. So it'd be good to have some guidance on how to spend that money. So those have been hot topics with planning. And so I just wanted to tie those two items together. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Leslie? Regional Tourism Board.
Regional Tourism won't meet again until May 17th, but I did want to mention that the Road and River Relay sponsored by the Lexington Sunrise Rotary Club is this Saturday from 10 to 12 and kicks off on Main Street in front of the library. For more information, you can visit their website at lexvaroadandriverrelay.org. And also this Saturday, the Brownsburg Museum is hosting a tour of Brownsburg slave houses. 5 privately owned former slave dwellings will be open to the public for a free tour. This is a self-driving tour, and a map of the tour sites will be available on tour day at the Brownsburg Museum. And for more information, you can check out brownsburgva.com. And any questions?
Questions?
Is the Brownsburg Museum right in downtown Brownsburg?
it is.
Okay,
It
so
is.
If anybody's trying to find it, now they know.
On their main street.
Yes, these three.
Raro, Mr. Sigler.
The RARO Board of Directors met last night. We met over in the press box of the Southern Virginia Football Stadium. It was a beautiful setting. I don't know if anyone's ever watched a game in that stadium. It is incredible views, House Mountain. It's just a very, very attractive facility that SVU has built. Kind of an update as we're kind of working through our spring sports. We sponsor softball and baseball. Seasons are going really well for a bunch of kids. Our numbers in total, kids playing the sports, 363 this year. And the number pre-pandemic in 2019, it was 323. So that's a pretty good increase in the last couple of years. I mean, pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic. But also we've got a lot of new programs that we're trying to kick off. And we had an introductory pickleball class, if you will, and 38 people participated in that. And that was, we were thrilled with that. And now we're having an open play program of pickleball, and that continues to go really well. Additionally, though, you may have seen that we're going to try some co-ed volleyball this summer. Some opportunities for folks to play volleyball, and then also adult co-ed softball. And so, Glasgow has done a great job with that. They've had some leagues, some teams in recent years. RARO has done that in years past. It went away, but we are trying to bring that back to gauge the interest and to do something for the adults this summer. And so we're really, really excited about that. We're already going to be starting fall registration next week. It's amazing to think about that, but we still try to get a lot of kids while they're in school, get those flyers out while they're in school, wrapping up the year and getting it on their calendar for the fall when they come back. And then really one thing that you just might find interesting, RARO has the responsibility given to it by the localities to help schedule a lot of the fields. And so, for example, in the city of Lexington, while of course the fields are owned by the city of Lexington, RARO kind of takes the lead on scheduling Fox Field, Brubaker Field, those diamonds, those facilities. And we do a great job working with all of the other athletic teams, whether it be Lex Lax, Rockbridge United, just all kinds of other teams or organizations to do that scheduling. One of the challenges recently that RARO has had as a staff is doing a good job scheduling the fields in Buena Vista. There's some travel teams that like to use some of the fields. And so this is not necessarily a challenge here in Lexington just yet, but in Buena Vista, we've actually posted signage on the fields, kind of who's using the fields when, just to kind of alert folks that, boy, to work the best way is that everyone has fair shot to schedule the fields, and the way to schedule it is this way, through RARO. And so that's something that we're working through in Buena Vista. It's not yet an issue here in Lexington, but if it is, we may post some informational signage on some of the highly used fields that say, here's how you can schedule the fields, here's who does it, and here's who's using it on a certain day. So I just kind of bring that to your attention, because again, all of our fields, we want them being used, but we also want them to be available when a particular group or team thinks that they have access to it. We don't like to have fields double booked or anything. So just wanted to share that with you all, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Where do you sign up for a third base coach?
If your right arms waves kids around to keep running, never stop at third base. Always send them.
That's it. I was thinking about doing that.
Yeah.
Where is the pickleball open season held?
So Moy River Middle School has been a really good facility for us doing pickleball. And then also we're trying to modify some stuff out at Rivermont.
Thank you.
And I was just curious, the age range of the class of people who came for the pickleball introduction class.
Kids of all ages. Okay. I actually, we talked about the ages, and I don't have them in my report, but honestly, I think that we had some, younger folks up to, but it was just, it attracted the group that we hope to attract and introduce a great sport to adults. So
You are neither too young nor too old to participate.
that's the good answer.
Even kids with chicken pox.
Threshold did not meet this month, this past month, but we do have word that we will hopefully have a speaker coming on May 25th from DHCD to talk about housing. So I will be able to give you an update and with a confirmation, hopefully on the 19th when we meet again. Maury Service Authority.
Thank you. The Maury Service Authority Board met this week on Tuesday and conducted a public hearing for the proposed water and sewer rate, new rates, which results in an increase. And no one came to speak. And the board unanimously adopted the rate increases. And so roughly 5% for the MSA, a little bit more than 5, not 6% rate increase for water and sewer rates. So look forward to that when your bill comes. And part 2 at our meeting, we are on schedule for submitting the water plant modernization documents to the state to receive funding. Hopefully that large 45% is still in play. And it's one of these, I think it's one of these things where your project is judged as to how it stands with the other projects that are. But we made the deadline and the papers will be submitted, and we're looking forward to hearing back. We don't know when. The preliminary engineering reports are in process and appear to be on schedule at this time. So things are moving. Again, hold on to your wallets. And the suggestion that we've already seen a not rate increase, but a cost increase for a part of the water plant modernization has happened, has gone, one phase of it has now been re-estimated from 7 million originally to 10 million now. So if you increase the original estimate overall of 20, we're now at 23 and still going in there. And so again, Ms. Alexander had said, the sooner we do it, the less it will cost. So we're eagerly waiting for the report back from the state on the submitted projects in the report.
Thank you. Any comments? Questions? So what we'll do now is go back to citizen comments and remarks. Former council member David Cox is in the house and had to step out during that time. So he has returned. He knows the rules and we'll let him speak. If we could give your name and address to the
Thank you.
clerk.
David
please.
Cox, 107 Lee Avenue, and I thank you very much for your courtesy. Particularly, like the mayor, I was double booked and had to step out for a few minutes, and I'm glad, and I appreciate your adjusting the schedule for me. I have to say, it's mighty good to be back in this room where, like you, I spend many hours, most of them happy. I'm glad we're back. I wanted to talk with you before you get into the consideration of Washington and Lee about a concern that involves it, but also all of our not-for-profit institutions. And sharing a statistic which I also did with the Planning Commission a few weeks ago, 65%. As you may know, but I didn't, and I don't think the public knows, that's the figure that Karen Roundy gave me of the amount of property in this city exempt from taxation, 65%. When I was on your side of the table, it was 52%, 13 percentage points in a dozen years. Now, to put the figure into further context, I asked the Virginia Municipal League for some statistics, which indicated that Lexington is by far the highest percentage of tax-exempt property of any jurisdiction in the Commonwealth. The next highest is Newport News at 11 percentage points below us, 54%. It works out for us to be approximately 3 times the city average. The counties are a different story. They have more land. So we are in a unique and I think very dangerous position. I will send the VML report to the city manager so that you will have that accessible. And I realize that some of that property belongs to the city or the county, such as this building. I realize that the value of land has increased with developments at VMI, at Washington and Lee, and that has had an effect. I also realize that Washington and Lee does donate a large amount to the city in lieu of taxes, although whether that's commensurate or not with the taxable property, I don't know. The total value of taxes lost to all these exemptions together, according to the VML, exceeds $11 million. At this point, every parcel exempted from taxes becomes, in effect, a perpetual contribution to the institution. Now, my concern, of course, is that this incursion into tax-paying properties, especially but not limited to the downtown area, is going to continue as it has over the last dozen years. And virtually the only control that the city has over it is zoning and influence, which is why the upcoming discussions, I think, are so important. Now, without a doubt, our local institutions nourish our city's well-being. We wouldn't exist without them. And they contribute to our well-being in all sorts of ways. And we heard 2 projects that were exemplified just that. But all these institutions themselves also count on effective security, functioning infrastructure, and excellent schools so that they can survive. And yet, because of their growth, for all the positive features, it diminishes the proportion of taxes, of tax-paying property and we got to pay the bills. And this poses dangerous ramifications that holds out not just for tax-paying businesses and residents, but also for the institutions themselves. For in the end, we're all in this together. That's my concern, and I thank you for allowing me to share it.
Thank you, sir. So next is the mayor's report. The mayor didn't leave anything for me to report for him. However, I will take this point of privilege to comment that the city manager and I hopefully will be able to provide a more detailed report to you at the next meeting about the happenings for Juneteenth and the historic marker designation dedication. So you'll hear from us on the 19th. We'll have a little bit more update than we do right now, but please pencil in June 19th at 1:30 for that dedication ceremony. It's been changed from 4 o'clock to 1:30. Thank you. And at this time, I will go ahead and read the proclamation declaring May 22nd as Foster Care Awareness Month in Lexington, Virginia. And whereas children are key to our community's future success, prosperity, and quality of life. And whereas the more than 5,400 children in Virginia's foster care system have a right to thrive, learn, and grow in a safe and loving environment. And whereas foster parents provide love, safety, and stability that children need in order to overcome past traumatic experiences in order to reach their full potential. And whereas Lexington City foster parents are caring for and nurturing children and youth in foster care today. And whereas we must come together as a community to recognize the important role foster parents play in caring for children who have experienced abuse and neglect, supporting family reunification and building strong communities. And whereas a need exists to identify more foster parents in order to ensure children, older youth, children with complex needs, and siblings have a safe and stable home in their community. And whereas there are numerous individuals, businesses, organizations, associations, religious groups, and public servants who are dedicated to raising awareness about the needs of children and youth in the foster care. And whereas Foster Care Awareness Month is celebrated nationally to raise awareness about foster care and to encourage community involvement as foster families, volunteers, and mentors. And be it therefore resolved, the Lexington City Council does hereby declare May 2022 as Foster Care Awareness Month in Lexington City and urge all citizens to come forward and take action that will positively impact the life of a child in foster care. Be it further resolved, the Lexington City Council does hereby commend Intercept Health Treatment Foster Care for their efforts to raise awareness surrounding this societal crisis, adopted this 5th day of May, 2022. Thank you. City Manager's report.
I'll give us a pass tonight and pass it along to the city attorney.
Thank you. And hopefully we will hear some word on our well-traveled closing documents for the VDOT property.
Indeed, at the end of a long saga, about 11 o'clock this morning, the documents were reported, the funds have been wired, so the city of Lexington is now the proud owner of what is probably will always be known as the former VDOT property until it is taken over in some way, shape, or form. But that's all taken care of. The only remaining piece is to record the transfer of the rights of way on Waddell Street and some of the internal roads, but those documents should be on the way for us to take care of. Hopefully next week, Jim and I will need to sign those and we'll record those, but that's all getting buttoned up and moving forward.
Great. Any questions?
Are we now landlords to any tenants of that property?
No, that's open. No one's there. I believe there's the school board is still having the building there. But transportation office.
Yeah,
right.
So we are landlord to tenants.
Yes.
And would the co-op also be on that property? I'm just gauging.
The co-op is on there on a temporary basis, and so we probably do need to put in place some type of an MOU to either allow them or not allow them to use the property until we choose a developer or choose some type of development. That would be, I guess, the recommendation I would be making in the near future, sitting down with Jared and just putting together a very simple MOU to present to you.
And I don't know if the county had a lease with VDOT or if what their arrangement was, but I'll be in touch, or Jim and I guess I'll just get in touch with Vicky and see what's going on, because that should be papered up in some way. I suppose at this point, we'll just take over whatever terms they had with VDOT.
Anyone else? Okay. Now comes the hard part. We were scheduled to have something on the agenda for new business, but that's been taken off already for consideration on the 19th. We have next on the agenda, closed meeting, but we have no need for one this evening, and I thank you for that. And in this point, do we have any more business with anybody? No?
Just briefly, you may have noticed I put in your places this sticker for Rockbridge Outdoors. Just wanted to maintain awareness of the program of Rockbridge Outdoors. As I said, I think maybe a year ago, we finished our strategic plan. The mission of Rockbridge Outdoors is to collaboratively advance, create, and promote outdoor recreational opportunities in the Rockbridge area. It's more of an organization of organizations numbered at least 25, including the city of Lexington, County of Rockbridge, et cetera, and all of our local institutions and businesses. But this is a new product from the Outdoors organization that you can use for your laptops or your water bottles. Just recently earlier this week, representatives from the Old Growth Forest Network were in town to dedicate a section of the James River Face Wilderness on the Belfast Trail near the Marble Yard as an old growth forest. And the representatives that I spoke with that were in from out of town that had never been here regarded, Rockbridge County is just a really cool place to come visit. I can't wait to bring my family and friends back to further explore the area. So just those little seeds of interest can bear great fruit without a whole lot of effort and nurturing. It's more, word of mouth, bringing people in to understand the beautiful assets that we have here and encourage more visitation. So this is just a little symbol of the efforts we're doing, and it's a great program. I was telling Jim about this earlier. Whenever we all leave a meeting, we'll all feel very positive and invigorated because of the special place that we get to live in, being Lexington and Rockbridge County. So just wanted to share that. Thank you for your time.
Very appropriate. Thank you, Chuck. And I want to thank our concerned citizens for being with us, some of you week after week. And I want to thank our dedicated staff for putting in all the work and accomplishing great things for our citizens and for our city council. Thank you. And on that note, we're adjourned.